It was the first week of freshman year when I moved into the narrow dorm room on the 4th floor of Hawthorne Hall. The building smelled of old wood and floor wax, and at night the hallways carried every echo. My roommate, Eli, was a quiet guy from out of state. By midnight, the floor usually went silent till the knocking began. Thing here, Cass. That dorm room knocking story expanded by about 10 more natural paragraphs in a suspenseful or nightmare-style narration. No extra title or bold text, just straight storytelling. It started as a faint tap I almost blamed on the pipes. But the rhythm was 2 deliberately slow knocks, a pause, then 3 more. Eli and I sat up in our bunks, listening to the sound creep closer down the hallway. The dorm was ancient, its walls thin enough that whispers carried like wind. Heard doors hinged softly in the distance, but no footsteps. Each knock landed heavier than the last, as if whoever or whatever was outside our neighbors' rooms was taking their time. When the knocking reached the room next to ours, the air inside felt suddenly colder. Eli grabbed his phone to record, but the second he hit record, the knocks stopped. Silence, thick enough to taste, filled the corridor. I exhaled, thinking it was over, when our door handle rattled hard. Once, then again, we both froze. From the other side came a soft breath, long and slow, like someone pressing their mouth right to the crack of the door. I mouthed, "Who's there?" But no words came out. My throat felt locked. Eli finally croaked, "Who is it?" No answer, just another 3 knocks, slower this time, in the metallic click of the handle trying to turn. Summoning nerve, I crept to the peephole. The hallway was empty. Not a shadow, not a flicker of movement. Only the dim emergency light buzzing at the far end. Then a whisper brushed the wood so close I felt the vibration. Asterisk, I know you reawake. Asterisk, the sound wasn't male or female, just a low, breathy murmur that didn't match any voice I knew. Ali grabbed the chair from the desk and jammed it under the handle. We stayed like statues for what felt like an hour, barely breathing. Eventually, the building's radiator hissed back to life, and the tension eased, but neither of us slept. The next morning, we reported it to the RA. Security reviewed the cameras. Its timestamp matched our story exactly 1:14 a.m., but the hallway feed showed nothing. No person entering or leaving, just our door handle jerking back and forth on its own. Eli transferred to a different dorm within a week. I stayed, but every night after, I kept that chair wedged tight under the knob. And sometimes, when the hall goes silent and the old pipes settle, I swear I hear a slow, patient knock echoing toward my door again. At 1:14 a.m., we heard 3 slow knocks on a door down the hall, then 3 more on the next door. The sound crept closer, steady and patient. When it reached ours, the handle twitched like someone testing it. Eli whispered, "Probably some drunk kid." But through the peephole, the hallway was empty. We heard a whisper against the wood, "I know, you're awake." Then silence. The chair under the handle vibrated softly, like something heavy was pressing from the other side. I held my breath, straining to hear over the pounding in my chest. Faint scraped metal against wood traveled downward, stopping right at the floor, where the gap beneath the door showed a thin stripe of light. A shadow passed across that stripe. Not fast, slow, deliberate. It lingered long enough that I could see the darkness ripple as if someone crouched there, studying the threshold. Eli's phone light trembled in his hand. He whispered, barely a thread of sound, "Call campus security." I nodded, but the second I unlocked my screen, the shadow lifted away and the hallway went silent again. We waited. 5 minutes. 10. Nothing but the hum of the old radiator and the faint tick of the wall clock. Finally, Eli pressed his ear to the door, then jerked back as if burned. "It's breathing," he mouthed. I leaned closer and heard it too slow, deliberate inhales and exhales, as if someone huge and patient was right there, inches away, separated only by thin wood. Suddenly, a whisper slid through the crack, so low it vibrated in my skull. "Don't open it." My fingers froze on the lock. Eli's eyes were wide, reflecting the dim light like an animal's. We stayed like that, suspended, while the breathing faded until only the radiator hissed again. When security finally arrived 20 minutes later, they found an empty hallway. No footprints on the dusty linoleum. No fingerprints on the knob. It's just us, two sleepless freshmen, and a door that still felt cold to the touch. Even now, when I walk that corridor at night, the lights flicker near our old room. And every so often, if I pause and listen hard enough, I catch that same slow breath, waiting just beyond the wood. Security checked the cameras the next day. The timestamp matched the knocking, but the hallway feed showed nothing. No person, no shadow. Just our door handle moving on its own. Eli transferred out 2 weeks later. I still sleep with a heavy chair wedged against the door. The maintenance crew came by that afternoon, insisting the cameras were flawless. They replayed the footage in front of my every door in perfect focus till the frame reached ours. That's when the feed stuttered, a flicker of static, and for 3 full seconds the screen turned pure black. The technician frowned. That's not supposed to happen," he muttered. He rewound and slowed the clip, but those 3 seconds stayed empty, like the hallway itself had been erased. That night, I kept the overhead light on. Around 2 a.m., the bulb began to hum, a low electric buzz that made my teeth ache. The chair under the handle shook once, a quick jolt, then went still. I forced myself not to move, clutching my phone with white knuckles. From somewhere in the vent came a soft knock 3 times, perfectly spaced. I crawled onto the desk and pressed my ear to the grate. The metal was cold enough to sting. Another 3 knocks echoed, this time farther away, like someone traveling through the ductwork. I barely slept. At dawn, when the first light touched the window, a new sound woke me, a faint tap-tap on the glass itself. Outside, 4 stories down, the ground was empty, but a single oily handprint marked the outside of my window pane, 4 too high for anyone to reach without a ladder. Campus security offered no answers. It suggested a prank, but no one on my floor owned climbing gear, and the window had locked from the inside all night. Eli texted a week later from his new dorm, still hearing the knocks. I started to type back, then stopped, because at that very moment, 3 deliberate raps sounded on the wall behind my head, slow, patient, and impossibly close. I was assigned a double room mid-semester, and told a new transfer named Erica would be sharing it. When I first met her, she was polite, but almost whisper quiet, with a faint lavender scent that lingered after she left. She kept strange hours. Sometimes I'd wake to find her bed perfectly made, and no sign she'd been there at all. Still, I convinced myself she was just shy and busy. The night after that visit to the housing office, I left my desk lamp on and tried to study. But the air in the room felt heavier than usual, as if a storm were pressing against the walls. The lavender smell clung to everything, stronger than any perfume should have been after days without her. I kept glancing at the bed across from mine. The blanket looked too perfect, tucked so tight it almost seemed ironed. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the fabric appeared to ripple slightly, like someone had just sat down. A faint metallic ping came from the closet on her side. It was the sound of a thin hanger shifting, the kind that moves only if a door opens. I waited, staring, but the closet door stayed shut. My phone buzzed against the desk. New text from the same unknown number glowed on the screen. Yuri, not alone. Turned off the lamp and backed toward the hallway, heart pounding. From behind me came a quiet creak of springs, as though weight had settled onto Erica's mattress. The sound was slow, deliberate, like someone lying down carefully to avoid notice. I snapped the light back on. The bed was still perfectly made, the pillow smooth, not a dent in sight. but the lavender scent flooded the room so strongly my eyes watered. I left the door wide open and sat in the hallway for an hour, pretending to scroll my phone. When I finally went back in, a single silver hairpin rested dead center on my own pillow. I had never owned one, and I knew I hadn't heard anyone enter. Slept in a friend's room that night. When I returned the next morning, every drawer on Erica's side stood open, as if someone had rifled through them in a hurry. The hairpin was gone, and the lavender scent had sunk deep into the sheets, refusing to fade. Even after I moved out for good, that smell would surprise me in random places, in a bus seat, in the corner of a new room, drifting through the air like a reminder that Erica, whoever she was, hadn't finished with me yet. One night, as I drifted off, a soft crying came from near the window. "Erica?" I asked. The sobbing stopped instantly. When I turned on the lamp, the room was empty, her bed untouched, her closet neatly closed. Over the next few days, the lavender scent grew stronger, and I did hear faint footsteps or the squeak of her mattress when she supposedly was in home. Then a text arrived from an unknown number. "Dan, let them give your room away." My skin prickled. I marched to the housing office, only to hear, "There's no Erica registered here. You were assigned a single." The night after I found my pillow empty of that silver hairpin, I tried to convince myself it had all been stress. But the air inside the room stayed unnaturally cold, even with the heater humming. I pulled the blankets tight and closed my eyes, only to hear a faint humming, soft, tuneless, floating from Erica's side of the room. It was the kind of sound someone makes when they think they're alone. I opened my eyes. The light from the hallway spilled across the floor, and in it I saw a thin shadow stretch from the empty bed toward mine. It didn't move like a normal shadow. It pulsed as if breathing. My phone lit up on the nightstand. A new message from the same hidden number read, "Still here." Before I could react, the closet door eased open with a slow, dragging creak. Inside, every hanger swayed as though someone had brushed past them. No draft, no window open. Just that steady lavender scent, so thick it felt like it coated my lungs. I grabbed my bag and backed into the hallway, heart hammering. Behind me, the door shut on its own with a quiet click. When I returned the next morning, the room looked untouched, except for a small circle drawn in lavender-scented chalk on the floor where Erica's bed had been. I moved out that day without telling a soul. Yet weeks later, as I unpacked in my new dorm, a folded scrap of paper slipped from between my shirts. On it, in delicate handwriting, were 3 words: "Welcome back, roommate." Shaken, I returned to find her closet cracked open and her suitcase gone. Only a silver hairpin lay on the floor. That night, I propped the door open and left the hallway light on. Just before dawn, a whisper floated from the empty bed. "Don't move out." The next morning, the hairpin stood upright on her pillow, as if carefully balanced by invisible hands. I moved to another dorm that same day, but sometimes I still wake to the unmistakable scent of lavender and the soft creak of a closet door closing on its own. I thought moving to a different building would end it, but the first night in my new room, the lavender scent drifted in as soon as I turned off the light. It was faint at first, almost like a memory, but it grew stronger until it coated the air like invisible smoke. I checked the hallway empty. The scent faded the moment I stepped outside, only to return the second I closed the door behind me. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. No number showed on the screen, just a blank contact and a single word: "Stay." I deleted it without replying, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone. The next morning, a small silver hairpin lay on my desk. I knew I hadn't packed it. I had left the first one behind, yet here it was again, gleaming in a shaft of sunlight. Over the next week, the sounds began: soft creaks at the foot of my bed, the whisper of fabric moving when nothing was there. Sometimes I'd wake to a low humming, the same tune I'd heard that last night in the old room. I asked my new roommate if she'd noticed anything strange. She gave me a puzzled look. "No," she said slowly, "but your side of the room always smells like flowers. It's nice." I stopped inviting anyone over after that. It felt wrong, like bringing them into someone else's space, someone who hadn't agreed to leave. One rainy evening, I caught a glimpse of movement in the mirror above my dresser. A figure stood behind me for an instant, long hair, head tilted butt. When I spun around, the room was empty. The lavender scent sharpened until it made my eyes water. Sleep became nearly impossible. Every time I started to drift off, the mattress dipped slightly, as if a weight settled beside me. The first few times I told myself it was a dream, okay, but the sensation of pressure against the sheets was too real to dismiss. Desperate, I asked campus security for a key change, okay. They humored me, but said the lock showed no tampering, and the door's sensors hadn't registered anyone entering at night. That weekend, I left to visit home, hoping distance would break whatever was happening. But halfway through the drive, my phone buzzed with another blank text message. "You can't leave." When I returned Sunday evening, a single, fresh lavender sprig lay across my pillow. It hadn't been there when I locked the room. I threw it away, only to find another on the windowsill the next morning. No footprints on the carpet. No sign of entry. It's just that endless, delicate fragrance that now felt less like perfume and more like a warning. Even now, months later, I'll catch that same scent when I least expect it, walking across campus, sitting in a crowded lecture hall, or alone in the library stacks. It always comes with a sudden chill, as if an unseen roommate has followed me and is waiting for the day I finally stay. My dorm building was old enough that the vents carried every sound. Most nights, I heard muffled laughter or footsteps from other floors. Nothing unusual. But late one Thursday, as I crammed for a midterm, a sharp metallic tap echoed through the vent above my desk. A key repeated 3 quick clicks, like someone rapping a coin against the duct. I stood on my chair and pressed my ear to the grate. A low scraping drifted back, slow and deliberate, followed by a faint exhale that didn't sound like airflow. My roommate, Jenna, shrugged it off, saying the pipes were ancient, but the noise stayed with me long after we turned out the lights. The next night, I left my desk lamp on, the light pooling against the old plaster walls. Around 1 a.m., the tapping returned 3 crisp clicks, perfectly spaced. I froze, waiting for it to stop, but the sound shifted, traveling along the duct as though someone was crawling inside. I climbed onto the chair again and peered into the vent. The metal smelled faintly of rust and something sour, like old sweat. A whisper of air brushed my face, warmer than the draft should have been. Jenna stirred behind me. "Not again," she muttered, half asleep. Before I could answer, a single low laugh slid out of the vent, dry, breathless, almost amused. Jenna sat bolt upright, eyes wide. We pushed the dresser beneath the grate, but the sound didn't stop. It circled the room, soft scraping that seemed to come from every corner of the ductwork. I could almost picture someone dragging their nails along the metal as they crawled. The following afternoon, we begged maintenance to inspect the system. They unscrewed the grate and shined a flashlight inside. Dust coated every surface, yet a narrow trail ran down the center, as if something or someone had cleared a path. The worker frowned and said, "That's odd," before quickly resealing the vent. That evening, I left my phone recording on the desk while we went to dinner. When we came back an hour later, the dresser had shifted 6 inches from the wall. The recording captured faint metallic scraping, followed by a soft thud like a knee hitting metal. I played it for campus security. They told us it was probably the building settling and advised we try to relax. Their casual tone only made the silence in our room heavier. Around 3 a.m., I woke to a sudden gust of warm air across my face. The vent above my bed rattled violently for 3 long seconds, then stopped. From inside came a slow exhale, as though someone was right there, inches from my head, breathing in the dark. I grabbed Jenna's arm and we bolted into the hallway, sleeping on the common room couches until sunrise. When we returned, the vent was perfectly still, but a thin streak of fresh dust trailed from the grate to the center of the floor, ending in a single bare footprint, small, human, and pointing toward our beds. We moved out the next day. Even now, in a different dorm, I sometimes hear that same deliberate tapping in the walls late at night, as if the person in the ducts never really left and has simply found a new way to follow. A week later, I woke to a flicker of movement across the ceiling. The hall light outside was dim, but in the vent slats a shape shifted darker than the surrounding black. It wasn't dust. It pulsed, as if someone crouched behind the grate, watching. I whispered to Jenna. When she climbed onto the desk beside me, the shadow slid back, disappearing with a faint scrape of metal. The next morning, we reported it to maintenance. They insisted the ducts were too narrow for anyone to enter and promised to check them anyway. That night, while brushing my teeth, I heard a soft laugh carry through the vent, low and dry, like someone exhaling through a smile. Jenna heard it too. We pushed a heavy dresser beneath the vent before bed, but the cold air that seeped around it smelled faintly of sweat. The next evening, we tried to drown out every sound with music, but even over the speakers, we heard a faint metallic tapping from the ceiling. It wasn't random. 3 quick clicks, a pause, then 3 more. Jenna turned the volume higher. The tapping grew louder, matching the beat for a few seconds before stopping completely. Like whoever was inside knew we were listening. I climbed on the desk again, phone light aimed at the grate. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw an eye staring back, just a glint of reflected light. Then it was gone. My stomach dropped so fast, I nearly fell. We slept with the overhead light on, but at some point during the night, it flickered and died. The room went black, except for a thin glow from the hallway. In that dimness, the vent rattled softly, followed by the unmistakable sound of a slow inhale. I held my breath, straining to tell if it was only the building's old system, but the breathing was too rhythmic, too human. It lingered for almost a full minute before fading into silence. The next morning, I found a fine layer of dust scattered across my desk, forming a narrow trail that led straight from the vent to my chair. No breeze could have left such a neat path. We reported it again. Maintenance unscrewed the grate, shining a brighter light this time. They shook their heads, saying there was no sign anyone had entered and that the ducts were sealed at the far end. That night, I set my phone to record audio. Around 2 a.m., a sharp bang jolted us awake. The vent clanged as if something heavy shifted inside. Then came a soft, dragging noise that seemed to move away into the distance. The next day, I listened to the recording. The mic had captured every sound clearly, each metallic scrape, the single bang, and, faintly beneath it all, a whisper that made my skin crawl. Closer. Jenna refused to stay another night. We packed what we could and slept in the lounge. When we returned for the rest of our things, the vent hung open again. Screws scattered on the floor as if someone or something had been waiting for us to come back. Even now, weeks later in a different dorm, I sometimes wake to that same 3-click pattern echoing in the walls, a quiet reminder that whatever lived in those vents might have found a way to follow. 3 days later, a girl from the floor above us vanished after a late-night study session. Security combed the building and found a loose grate in her room, leading into the same ventilation system. Inside the duct, they discovered footprints in the dust human, barefoot. Campus police never caught whoever made them. Our own vent was sealed shut the next morning with heavy bolts, but I still wake to phantom clicks in the walls. Sometimes, when the building is silent and the air stops moving, I swear I feel a breath of warm air brush the back of my neck. A reminder that someone once crawled through those vents and might still be listening. The maintenance team swore the bolts would keep anything out, but nights in that room never felt safe again. Even with the grate sealed tight, the clicking returned, softer now, as if it came from behind the walls instead of the vent. Jenna refused to stay alone, so we dragged our mattresses closer together. One evening, as the dorm settled into silence, a slow scratching started near the headboard inside the plaster itself. It traced the outline of the wall, following our breaths. I pressed my ear to the spot. A faint hum, almost a tune, vibrated through the drywall, rising and falling like someone whispering a song. The sound traveled upward, then stopped directly above us. The ceiling light flickered twice and went dark. In the brief afterglow, I caught a darker shadow crawling across the ceiling line, too fast for any normal movement. When the light steadied again, nothing remained but the quiet hiss of the radiator. The next morning, a thin streak of dust stretched from the sealed grate to our closet door. It looked like something had dragged itself across the floor during the night, leaving a faint trail of gray behind. Campus security inspected once more and found no evidence of entry. They joked about mice, but the trail was the width of a human forearm. That night, I slept with headphones on, music turned low. Even through the songs, I felt vibrations in the mattress-dini pulses, as if someone was knocking from inside the frame. When I pulled the covers over my head, a warm breath slid across my cheek, unmistakably human and far too close. I never spent another night in that room. But sometimes, walking across campus after dark, I hear that same three-click pattern echo off the brick walls, a soft reminder that whoever once crawled through those vents might still be searching for another way out. It began with a single scrap of paper slid under my dorm room door one Tuesday night. Just one word. Hi. I figured it was a bored neighbor playing a harmless prank, so I tossed it out and forgot about it. The next evening, another note appeared. You looked pretty in class today. I laughed it off, but couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that someone had been close enough to watch me. The next evening, I left the hallway light on, hoping the brightness would keep whoever it was away. Right after midnight, I heard the soft scrape of paper sliding against the floor again. This time, the note read, I like the blue sweater you wore today. Hadn't worn that sweater in weeks. The realization chilled MIT meant they'd been watching long enough to know what I owned, not just what I wore. I decided to stay awake. Phone camera aimed at the crack beneath the door. At 1:13 a.m., the sound returned, a slow drag like someone's sleeve brushing the floor. But the camera showed only empty hallway. No shadow. The next morning, I found another slip of paper taped to my window from the outside. Why didn't you open the door last night? My room was 4 floors up, no balcony, no ledge wide enough to stand on. I told campus security everything. They walked the perimeter and said the ground was muddy from last night's rain. But there were no footprints, no ladder, marks, nothing. They suggested it might be a student prank. That night, I pushed a heavy chair against the door and left my roommate, as Big Dog, inside with me. Around 2 a.m., the dog lifted his head and growled at the door, low and steady. A faint rustle followed, then the sound of something small tapping against the wood, almost like fingernails. When I finally slept, a nightmare jolted me awake, someone standing over me, whispering. The dog barked sharply, snapping me back to reality, but the door was still wedged tight, untouched. At dawn, a new note waited just inside the room, resting on my desk chair. It simply said, Nice dog. I felt the room tilt around me. The chair had never moved. The door never opened. Yet somehow, that note had been placed inside while I slept. Packed my essentials and left for a friend's apartment that morning. I returned later to grab the rest of my things. A final message lay on the floor in neat handwriting. You can't hide forever. I moved out that day and never spent another night in that building. But even now, in a completely different city, I sometimes hear the faint scrape of paper against the floor late at night. And I wake certain that if I look down, I'll see another note waiting just for me. Within a week, the messages came every night, always when I was alone. Some were almost sweet, sweet dreams, while others felt darker. I like when you sleep facing the wall. I told my roommate and we started locking the door, but the notes kept coming. Security checked the hallway cameras, but found nothing. One night, I stayed up late, pretending to sleep, and heard the faint scrape of paper sliding against the floorboards. By the time I jumped up and yanked open the door, the hallway was empty, silent, except for the hum of the exit light. The next day, I asked everyone on my floor if they'd seen anyone hanging around. Most just shrugged, but one girl said she'd noticed a tall figure in a dark hoodie lingering near the stairwell the night before, and she thought nothing of it until I told her about the notes. That night, I set up my phone to record video at the base of the door. I angled it so even the slightest shadow in the hallway would show. For hours, nothing happened except the soft hum of the building's heater. Around 2 a.m., the camera captured a quick flicker of movement, thin line of darkness stretching across the gap under the door. Then came the faint hiss of paper sliding forward. When I replayed it, there was no sound of footsteps, no breathing, just that soft scrape. The note this time said, "I like the way you jump when you hear me." My stomach dropped. They had to be listening, maybe even right outside while I read it. I asked campus security to patrol the hallway every hour. They agreed, but the next night, a new note appeared anyway. Security can watch you all the time. The letters were written in the same sharp handwriting, each line pressed hard enough to nearly tear the paper. My roommate and I started sleeping in shifts. Even so, around 3 one morning, I woke to a faint knock, 3 slow taps at the window. Our room was on the 4th floor. The glass trembled like someone was testing it, searching for a way in. I called the campus police again. They searched the area outside but found no ladder marks, no footprints in the soft dirt, nothing. One officer suggested it might be a disturbing but harmless prank. I could tell from his eyes he didn't believe that either. 2 nights later, the power went out across the entire building. In the pitch-dark silence, I heard a soft rustle near the door and a low voice whisper something I couldn't make out. The sound was so close, it felt like breath against my ear. When the emergency lights finally flicked on, a new note lay half under the door. It said, "Almost time." The words were smudged, as if written with a damp pen or a trembling hand. I didn't wait for another. Before sunrise, I packed what I could and left to stay with a friend off campus. I never returned to that room, but some nights I still wake suddenly, certain I've heard that same slow scrape of paper across a wooden floor. And I lie frozen, waiting to see if a note is waiting for me in the dark. The last note arrived during a storm, the wind rattling the old windows. When I bent to pick it up, water dripped from the paper, as if it had been outside in the rain only moments before. In thin black ink it read, "Dogs can't protect you forever." My chest tightened only. A few friends knew I was borrowing a friend's dog that night. Campus police searched again, but there were no wet footprints, no sign of forced entry, nothing. I moved to a different dorm the very next morning. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear a faint rustle near the bottom of my new door, and I swear I smell damp paper before sleep finally takes me. The first week in the new dorm felt calm enough that I almost convinced myself it was over. But one night, just past midnight, I heard a faint rustle near the door, so soft it could have been the building settling. Still, the sound set every nerve on edge. I stayed in bed, straining to listen. A minute later came the slow scrape of something thin sliding across the floor. My stomach tightened. I forced myself to look. Nothing was there. The next morning, a slip of paper waited just outside the door frame. It was blank, except for a damp ring of water, as if someone had pressed a wet fingertip to the center. I hadn't told anyone my new room number. That evening, I asked the RA if anyone had seen strangers in the hallway. She said no, and mentioned the security cameras hadn't flagged anything unusual. Her calm voice didn't match the worry in her eyes. I set up my phone to record video through the night. At 2:47 a.m., a soft scrape woke me. I watched the crack of light under the door. A shadow blocked it for less than a second, too quick to be a passing neighbor. When I checked the recording the next day, the hallway stayed empty, but a low whisper bled through the audio, a single drawn-out syllable that might have been my name. I slept at a friend's apartment for a few nights. When I returned for clothes, a damp paper rested on my pillow. 3 words, written in thin, black ink. Found you again? I reported everything to campus police. They searched the building top to bottom and found no forced entry, no prints, nothing. They suggested maybe someone had a master key, but every spare was accounted for. That night, I barricaded the door with furniture and left the lights on. Round 3 a.m., the lamp flickered twice and went dark. In the silence, I heard a faint breath near the head of my bed, followed by the light scrape of a fingertip across the floorboards. I didn't wait for daylight. I left the room barefoot, heart hammering, and never returned. Even now, months later, when the night is very still, I sometimes smell damp paper and hear that slow, deliberate scrape. A reminder that whoever slid those notes under my door may still be searching. Story 5, by roommate in the mirror. At the start of spring semester, I was assigned a single dorm room after my old roommate transferred out. A week later, the housing office emailed to say a late enrollee would be moving in with me. Her name was Mara. She showed up just after dusk, pale and quiet, with a single duffel bag. Her eyes were an odd gray that seemed to catch every bit of light. From the beginning, something felt off. She barely spoke, never unpacked, and at night she sat cross-legged on her bed, staring at the mirror bolted to our door. Sometimes I'd wake to find her still sitting there, whispering to her reflection. When I asked what she was saying, she only smiled and said, "Practicing." The mirror stayed in the room after I moved out, but I couldn't shake the sense that something had followed me. In my new dorm across campus, the bathroom mirror sometimes caught a flicker of movement behind me, even when the door was shut. I'd whip around, expecting to see a roommate or a shadow, but the room would be empty and quiet. One night, I woke to a faint humming Mara's soft, tuneless melody coming from the tiny vanity mirror above my desk. The sound was so low, it felt like it was inside my teeth. When I leaned closer, the surface of the glass rippled as if it were a puddle disturbed by a drop of rain. I called out her name without meaning to. The humming stopped instantly, and for a breath, I thought I heard a second voice behind me whisper, "Still here." I tried to convince myself it was stress, maybe an auditory hallucination. But the next morning, a wet fingerprint smudged the lower corner of the mirror. It wasn't mine. Over the next few days, the glass began to fog over on its own, even when the room was cold and dry. Sometimes words would appear in the mist, short, faint messages that vanished before I could photograph them. The first one simply said, "Practice." A week later, I found a Polaroid wedged between my class notes. It was of me, sleeping in my new bed. The photo angle matched the exact spot where the mirror hung on my wall. No one else had access to the room. That night, I tried to cover the mirror with a towel, but the fabric slid off while I slept. I woke to see Mara's reflection in the glass, sitting calmly on the edge of my bed, though the room itself was empty. Her eyes glowed faintly gray in the dim light. I stumbled back, and the reflection smiled, slow and deliberate, as if it had been waiting for me to notice. The towel that had fallen earlier was now folded neatly on the floor, a single gray hair curled on top. I stayed with a friend the next evening. When I returned, the mirror had a thin crack running from top to bottom, and a faint tune hummed from inside the wall. The same melody Mara used to whisper while sitting cross-legged in the dark. Even after I moved out for good, mirrors never felt harmless again. Public restrooms, store fitting rooms, even the dark screens of turned-off televisions. Sometimes they catch a reflection of someone standing just behind me. Eyes the color of storm clouds, waiting for the moment I dared to look a little too long. The first truly strange thing happened a few nights later. I woke to the sound of Mara's voice, low and rhythmic, almost like chanting, but her bed was empty. I found her in the darkened bathroom, standing befold that night. The small, weird things became constant. I'd put my keys on the dresser and find them in a drawer I never used. Textbooks I left closed were open the next morning, 2 pages I hadn't read. At first, I blamed tiredness, the mess of classes and papers, but the pattern kept growing sharper, too deliberate to ignore. Sometimes my phone would light up with a photo I hadn't taken blurry, half in shadow, a corner of the mirror visible. Other times, the phone would die overnight, even though the battery had been full. Once, the alarm, set for 9 a.m. Class went off at 3:17 a.m. with a picture notification that opened to an image of the mirror, fogged from the inside. Mara changed her routine too. She stopped going to the dining hall, stopped answering texts from friends. She'd sit for hours in the dark, hands folded, watching the glass like someone waiting at a train platform. If I tried to speak, she'd blink slowly and say nothing. The silence in the room felt heavy, like someone had hung a wet blanket across the air. One night, I woke to the sound of whispering, layered on whispering, like a dozen thin voices speaking behind a wall. I stumbled to the bathroom and found the mirror fogged letters blooming where a breath had touched the surface. She stood close, lips moving so fast I couldn't catch the words. The pattern in the fog looked almost like a map, a series of lines in tiny circles. I began leaving notes on my desks, small reminders I could read in the morning. Every single time, one of the notes would be folded into a neat square and tucked behind the mirror frame. I would find them only when I went to wipe the glass. The handwriting wasn't mine, slanted in a careful, old-fashioned script I couldn't place. Friends started asking why I looked hollow-eyed and jumpy in class. I laughed it off, said I was stressed. The truth was, I stopped trusting even the sound of my own footsteps. Often I'd think I heard someone moving around in the room while I was out. And when I came back, a book would be placed open on my bed, facing a page I vaguely remembered reading as a child. Once I found small rings of salt on the windowsill, 3 clean circles, spaced like a triangle. I don't know where they came from. They'll salt my room. Asked Mara about them, and she shrugged and said, "Little protections." Her voice was flat. Didn't sound like she believed what she said. The nights got colder. Not just the usual dorm chill, but a deep, slow cold that sat on my shoulders when I tried to sleep. My breath fogged in the dark, even when the radiator hissed out warm steam. The mirror would remain clear until the exact moment I turned away, and when I glanced back, the image would be hazed, as if someone had exhaled onto the other side. Once I saw, out of the corner of my eye, movement in the mirror that didn't match my motion. I spun around, and my room was empty. The reflection showed me standing at the foot of the bed, hands at my sides, but my real self had been halfway to the door. For a second, the reflection smiled with a mouth that wasn't mine. Then the glass cleared like nothing had happened. I tried covering the mirror with a blanket the way you decover a painting in a house you're relieving. I pinned the cloth tight, taped the edges. That night, I woke to feel cold fingers pulling the fabric away. The blanket lay on the floor in a sloppy heap, folded as neatly as a towel. The tape had been cut as if by something with precise, tiny scissors. The smell followed me too, sometimes a faint wet earth scent, sometimes the sweet metallic tang of old coins. It would creep up my nostrils while I brushed my teeth and make me look over my shoulder. I began to avoid my reflection. Mirrors felt like traps. I would turn the bathroom light off before looking, or catch my face in a darkened TV screen instead. Mara began leaving objects on the sill: a chipped teacup, a dried strand of hair, a Polaroid with faces blurred by water damage. She never offered explanations. When I asked where she found them, she'd only shake her head and hum the same thin tune that crawled into my dreams. Her hands moved like someone handling glass gentle, practiced. The Polaroids were the worst. Each one was of someone sleeping students I recognized walking across campus sand. The angle always matched the spot where the mirror hung. I didn't want to believe someone was watching us at night, taking picture after picture. But one morning, I found a Polaroid tucked under my pillow. I hadn't been home the previous night. After that, I stopped sleeping much at all. I would lie awake and listen for the telltale soft click that preceded whatever the mirror wanted. Sometimes, the click turned into a slow scrape, as if somebody or something was dragging a hand across the image of the glass. I could feel the hairs on my arms stand up, as if static electricity pulled them toward the frame. Finally, one night, I decided to confront it. I sat on the edge of the bed, facing the mirror, eyes locked on my reflection. I spoke aloud like an idiot, asking whatever was there to stop. Kana, the mirror, stayed stubbornly my own face for a long minute. Then, almost like a response, my reflection's eyes darkened, and it mouthed a single word I didn't want to hear: stay. I woke the next morning to find my suitcase open, and everything I owned neatly folded inside, as if someone had packed my things for me. The mirror was spotless. The Polaroids had been removed. The air felt less suffocating, as if someone had lifted their hand off my chest. But when I slipped the last shirt into my bag, I found one more photograph tucked into the lining, my face asleep in the new room, and behind me, in the glass, a shadow leaning close, smiling. Read the mirror, her face inches from the glass. She didn't move when I called her name. When she finally turned, her eyes looked almost black. "You shouldn't interrupt," she said softly, and brushed past me back to our room. After that, the atmosphere changed. Objects shifted during the day. My keys placed inside drawers I never used. Textbooks left open to random pages. At night, the mirror on our door sometimes fogged over from the inside, though the room stayed cold. Once I caught a glimpse of movement, and it's something behind me that wasn't there when I turned. One evening I returned from the library to find the lights off and the room icy cold. Mara stood in front of the door mirror, whispering in a language I couldn't recognize. The reflection looked wrong. Her lips were still while the image's mouth moved rapidly. I reached for the light switch, and the reflection snapped its head toward me, eyes glowing faintly silver. The real Mara didn't move. When the light finally flickered on, the mirror showed only my own terrified face. Mara was gone. Her duffel bag remained, but every item inside was soaked as if it had been left out in heavy rain. Campus security never found her. Why, it's no record she'd been assigned to the room at all. The mirror still hangs on that door, and sometimes when I pass it late at night, I swear I see two figures looking back, one of them mine and the other with those same cold gray eyes. I kept replaying that moment in my head, the mirror moving when Mara didn't, her mouth doing the talking while her face stayed blank. It felt like a bad dream you can't wake from. After she vanished, the room smelled like rain for days, even when the sun baked the windows dry. The duffel sat by the closet, sodden, and every zipper was stuck half open, like someone had been interrupted. Housing called it an odd missing persons case. They checked swipe logs and camera footage and shrugged at the gaps. "Nothing shows her leaving," they told me in careful tones. No one saw her after dinner. Their files had neat columns and empty boxes where answers should have been. People started asking questions I didn't have answers for. My friends tried to be sympathetic, but their faces were tired after a while, like they were saving their patience for someone else. A couple of them refused to sleep in my room after that night. One joked about paranormal podcasts, but the joke felt thin. Sometimes I'd awake in the small hours and sit up convinced I heard the scrape of fabric against the mirror. The sound was always impossibly soft, like fingernails over silk. I'd wait, breath shallow, until the radiator rattled and the noise dissolved into the apartment's usual size. A week later, I found a Polaroid tucked between the pages of a textbook left on my desk. It showed the bed, taken from the angle of the mirror. And in the glass, there was a pale face, too small to be me, too clear to be a trick of light. The photo had been soaked and dried. The edges were warped. On the back, someone had written one word. Remember? I locked the mirror in a closet for a week. I wrapped it in blankets and taped the seams. For a little while, the room felt safer, like someone had closed the door on the thing that was watching. Then, one morning, the tape lay shredded on the floor, and the blanket was folded into a perfect square beside the empty frame. Once, in the laundry room, another student paused by the full-length mirror and said, without looking at me, "It's wrong, your eyes are older." I stared at him, but he had already walked away. He later told me he remembered seeing two people in my room through the glass, me and someone standing behind me, though he swore he'd never been upstairs. At night, the mirror fogged from the inside, even in winter, little letters blooming as if written by a damp fingertip. The first message I could read said practice, the same word that had shown up elsewhere. Later, the mist spelled out a name that wasn't mine. I would wipe the glass and the letters would smear into nothing. I started covering reflective surfaces when I slept. Phone screens face down. The TV was unplugged. I'd catch myself peeking at dark windows and glass panes, waiting for movement that never came. My sleep thinned to nothing. I lived in the edges of dreams, awake enough to hear the house breathe. One night, I woke to the sound of camera shutters clicking in the hall outside my door. I dressed and opened the door to find nothing but a single Polaroid lying on the mat. The snapshot was of my doorway, taken from the other side. On the step, in the photo, stood the silhouettes, one small and hunched, the other tall and straight. They weren't there when I stepped outside. Housing insisted they would file another report. Security swore they were doing everything they could. But the cameras never showed the tall figure, never the wet footprints, never Mara stepping past the threshold. The footage always cut, or blurred, or simply showed me alone in the frame, staring back at myself like a stranger. Months later, I moved rooms and then cities. I told myself moving would bury the memory. But occasionally, when I passed a mirror in a quiet hallway or caught my reflection in the dark screen of a phone, I'd see a second shape standing just behind me, half there, half suggestion. Once it lifted a hand, and for a heartbeat, the glass reflected a pale palm pressed flat like a message. I keep the Polaroid tucked in a book on my shelf now, okay? Some nights, I pull it out and look at that small, soaked print of the bed. I don't know who took it, or why, or whether Mara is a person or something that learned how to sit where people sit and whisper where people whisper. All I know is the glass remembers things we think are gone, and sometimes it shows us what we are not ready to see. Which story chilled you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true horror stories.